I wanted to settle down here at the start of the week and give you guys good old-fashioned Q&A since we haven't done any since the announcement of POF, and I put out tons of them really quickly because I'd managed to play shortly before the demos. The problem is, most of your questions are all speculating about what the expansion could be, and I don't really have a good pool of things from people who have played the X-Pack now, so I've had to do some fine footwork with what I've chosen here today, but I think I've got some interesting topics. I will put a slight warner, there are some minor spoilers to do with the main story in this video. If you've still not played, this is probably one of the last warnings I will give on my channel about that. I figure if you're a big enough fan to care massively about the spoilers, but you still haven't completed it, well, that subsection of players is probably very, very small, right? So anyway, let's get on with the questions. They are old questions, but they're still relevant now, and we'll include in our answer information we learned now that the X-Pack itself is out. First one comes from Chiru Yes, who says, what do you think about the developer's choice of always having, at least so far, the elite specialization related armor being a helmet or a shoulder or gloves? I guess it may be hard to have a chest piece slash legging slash shoes that gives off the impression of a spec, though I think a back piece could be done well. Imagine some way down the line we could even make an entire suit of elite spec armor. So yeah, if you watched my Heart of Thorns review, one of my bigger problems with the elite specialization system was that they just gave us like one little armor piece. I would like a lot more, but I'm a fairly new purveyor of the world of Fashion Wars 2, so I can't really say I've got a particularly strong opinion on this one. I mean, yes, it would be nice if each elite spec we had an entire set of full armor for themselves. I've heard recently, now I've still not done a lot of the POF stuff, but I've heard recently that there's actually a lot of new armor and new skins they've put in there, like it dwarfs what came with Heart of Thorns. I'm sure if I'm wrong about this, people in the comments right now can already type furiously away and correct me, but apparently they have done a lot for skins. It's just they never loaded it all on the elite specs, and they decided to handle them the same way that they did with Heart of Thorns. I mean, I'm still nostalgic about the Guild Wars 1 iteration of having full armor sets for the professions, and I do think elite specializations are a good way to sort of infuse that into the sequel somewhat, but one armor piece, I guess, for now is what we'll still get. And they're good armor pieces, right? I often find myself using them when I do dip a little bit into Fashion Wars 2. It's just we all know that they could do better. Maybe they'll go further in 2 years, but come on, that's 2 years away. Let's start talking about that when it's maybe a little bit more appropriate. Moving on, Vla says, hey WP, a while ago you put out a video that was titled Guild Wars 2, Why the Crystal Desert? Question mark, exclamation mark. How does the lore slash story fit into the next expansion? He says, in this video, you referenced the leaks that suggested we'd go to the Crystal Desert. Now, at the time, there was no reason to suspect, in terms of the story, he means, that we would go there for the next expansion. So you instead presented some speculation on how the story could possibly lead us there. The story of episode 6 of Living Story Season 3 sent us on our way to the Crystal Desert for a reason that had nothing to do with the possible leads that you presented in your video, such as the Forgotten, Ritlock and Revenant channeling Glint, or even Gleam. Do you find it a weakness in One Path Ends that this revelation was abrupt? If you stopped playing the game 5 minutes before the final cutscene, would you be able to guess what region in the world the next expansion would take place? Or would this method of information delivery be awesome if the leaks didn't exist, and would this have worked somehow better if it was a true surprise? So, your general question, do I think this was a failing of Living World Season 3? I actually do. I think that was pretty miserable, honestly, that the whole way through Season 3, we never had any meaningful reason to understand why we were going to the Crystal Desert. It reminds me a bit, this is a weird comparison I'll make here, but it reminds me a bit of Lost Season 4, where because they'd been giving us flash forwards, we the community knew that a certain amount of characters would end up in a certain place, and the entire season you're wondering, how is it this selection of characters? And then magically in the finale, they all of a sudden kind of moved to the right place. And the writers were playing around with that a lot, trying to figure out how to make us second guess and surprise us at the last second, and that's kind of like, weirdly, because of the leaks, what Season 3 was doing. It's funny though, because if the leaks didn't exist, what were the devs really playing at? I would have liked a more coherent thread line as to why we would end up go to the place that we ended up going, which was the Crystal Desert. But no, they pinned it all on this big shock twist, this big surprise, right? And that's so much of what Season 3 did. It was all about the surprises. It was all about the twists. Who was Lazarus? Or more importantly, what were his real motives? Because who he was wasn't even set up as a mystery until the very end of episode 4, and then it was revealed right at the start of episode 5. So what I'd like to see season 4 do is to not go so much on twist reveals and instead tell the story that it kind of makes most sense to tell. I've never once believed that just because a community can guess or predict where something might be going, it's then a mistake to go in that direction. I don't think that we always need to be second guessing that. And yeah, if I look at the idea that ArenaNet are undertaking, the idea of producing an expansion along with Living World at the same time, the place that there's the most failing in terms of story, I think, is not with Path of Fire itself, but it's with Living World Season 3 and the end of Living World Season 3. You know, there's another kind of element to this, and that's the idea that episode 6 was a bonus episode and that they originally hadn't planned for it. But even if we account for that, even if we think of it as just, you know, it was going to be a 5-episode season and the finale was truly the end of Flashpoint, and it was just at the end of Flashpoint we were going to turn out we were going to the desert, even with that, it still would have been abrupt and it still wouldn't have been quite what I wanted. If we're going to corner for season 4, I want to see that be quite obviously told. If we're going to be paving our way for the next expansion to go to Cantha or something, I want to see them just pay that way naturally. If the next expansion instead is going to be about Char stories or Norn stories, then just do it as naturally as possible. And for what it's worth, if people follow me on Twitter, you'll know this already. That's something I'm very conflicted on right now, and I'm curious what you guys think. What do you want more than anything? Do you want to go to Cantha? And I know that people really want Cantha, but going to Cantha would be more human stuff, and I genuinely don't know whether we should do more human-based stuff and do the Cantha stuff, or is it time to finally get some more depth on the Norn and find a reason to love the Norn again and do stuff up north and find the Eye of the North and so forth, and the same for the Char. Is it not time maybe for one of those two races to get a bit of a look in? I mean, I'd say the Asura as well, but I'm just not that excited about the depths just yet. I don't know, I really don't. Cantha or one of those guys? Next, moving on, we've got Danix20, who says, "Hey WP, if you could have chosen a different god to have become Rogue instead of Balthazar, who would you choose?" So my answer to this question comes in 2 parts. First, there is what would have been the most exciting story, and then there's what's the story that would have made the most sense to do. So the story that would have made most sense to do is quite easy to answer, and it's Cormyr. Okay, I think that Cormyr had the most reason of all the Pantheon to go rogue, even more than Balthazar. See, we knew that Balthazar was a bit flawed, and we knew that he had these tempers, and we knew stuff like that, so it does fit his profile, his established profile, to an extent, how we've seen him be treated in Guild Wars 2. But Cormyr works on 2 big levels. First is something Path of Fire actually touched on, and that's that Cormyr was a human very recently, and she's close to humanity. And so if there's this idea that the gods are becoming very indifferent, very passive, they've got their eyes on bigger prizes, on other worlds, on other things that are going on, I like the idea that Cormyr could go rogue, because she's not quite as deep down that as the other gods are, who have been gods for, you know, a long time. Cormyr hasn't been a god for very long. So I like the idea that she'd go rogue on those grounds. I also like the idea that she'd go rogue on the ground that she absorbed Abaddon. Secrets and water. Secrets. Everything that Abaddon knew that could have caused him to form a different opinion to the other gods 1,000 years ago at the time of the Exodus. All of that is contained within Cormyr. So the thought that she could be lured into it and she might start to figure out what Abaddon was all about and follow in his footsteps. If anyone was going to do a similar thing, I wouldn't say Balthazar, I'd actually say Cormyr, and I think that's the story that makes the most sense. But is that the most interesting story? I don't know, actually. I understand why the devs went with Balthazar instead. In terms of, like, mainstream appeal, if you're going to do a big expansion, it's more fun to think of this fiery war god that we're fighting. He's a more compelling villain to put on a box than the more nuanced kind of weird thing that we've got with Cormyr. And Cormyr has all this kind of baggage, I would say, too, based on Guild Wars 1. Baggage that resurfaces a little bit in the Path of Fire story, but it would have resurfaced a lot more if she was the priority antagonist. So, if not Balthazar, though, who would be the best story? I actually think maybe Dwayna, then, or Melandru. I don't know, they've all got good reasons, and Lissa because she's inscrutable, but I always want her to be in the background a bit more. Dwayna because she was the leader of the gods, and for her to go rogue, and them not to have followed her, and to have an antagonist that's all about like life and air and stuff. I think that that would be an interesting route to go. Melandru, because she's like the oldest and we can credit her with so much of the rejuvenation of Tyria, and to see her capabilities would have been very fun. I think that could have been a cool angle to go. And then you've even got like the demigods or like the fringe characters. You've got people like Doom, Mengis, who never really had much of a role. Christ, look at me. I'm actually saying Mengis now instead of Menzies. Look at what you've done to me, internet. Look at what you've done. So I think all of those would have been nice stories. It's not that Balthazar was a huge mistake, but if I can't pick Balthazar or Cormier, maybe I'd go for a couple of those. Moving on, we got David McLean, who says, hey WP, what are your thoughts on the next raid? What do you think they'll bring in? Personally, I'd love the second raid to be something like the Realm of Torment, but what do you think that they'll bring us? I actually think you've hit the nail on the head there, and speaking about the next raid is quite an exciting thing, because all projections accounted for, I think it's most likely we'll see a new raid come into the game before Living World Season 4 kicks off. So the next big thing could be this. It could be very similar to how we had the beginning of the Forsaken Thicket right after Heart of Thorns. So this is really the hot topic, and will increasingly become the hot topic over the next couple of weeks. And so where will they take us? The Realm of Torment's a good choice. The entrance obviously does exist in Path of Fire, but I really don't like the design of this area. There was a good Reddit thread that came up just the other day, where people were comparing screenshots of Guild Wars 1 locations to Guild Wars 2 locations, purely revolving around Path of Fire. And so much of it is beautiful and interesting to look at. And I genuinely do agree with someone in the comments there that the entrance to the Realm of Torment really isn't that good in Guild Wars 2. And they did pick this very kind of unassuming, muted kind of thing, and it's so much of the Desolation revolves around that. I wonder why it feels like they copped out. They didn't put the effort into that area in the same way that they put a lot of effort into places like the Tomb of the Primeval Kings or Augury Rock. So, and I know that there's a meta, but just visually, I mean, this place is, I can't describe it any better than unassuming. So maybe they can fix that with a raid, but the fact that they dealt with it the way that they did makes me think it might not be the Realm of Torment as much as it could instead be the Fissure of Woe. And that's the other big thing on my list. The Fissure of Woe, I think, is a good one, because the devs will have noticed when Heart of Thorns came out how many of us were asking for it back then. And you might think, why did people care about the Fissure of Woe with Heart of Thorns? Well, really, purely because one of the only notable places in the Guild Wars 1 Maguma jungle was the Temple of Balthazar. And we knew that the Fissure of Woe was elite endgame in the first game. We knew that we were getting raids for the first time in Heart of Thorns. The Fissure of Woe was some of the first ones for GW1. So it all seemed to fit, and then they never did it in the end. We got the Forsaken Thicket and so on, but that itch hasn't been scratched. And now it's perfect. It's perfect not just because Balthazar's had a big part of this story, but also what they did with Balthazar in the story and what they talked about in terms of the gods. So I think that, yeah, maybe the Fissure of Woe. There's also reason to believe we've kind of been to the Realm of Torment already now, thanks to the Path of Fire story. But again, maybe that's discussion for a video all on its own. So yeah, my money's on Fissure of Woe. There's a couple of other leaky-based reasons to suggest that that might be true, but that's also where I'd really like to go as well. After that, then we can start looking at Tyria side stuff again, maybe. We'll see. Oh yeah, and then there's the question of how many wings is it going to be? Do you guys think it'll be another solo wing thing? It'll be another triple wing? I don't know. I'm kind of excited about a solo wing experience, just so that we can move on quite quickly and get to the Wizard's Tower or the Divinity's Reach sewers or something like that. But I know not many of you will be arguing like me for a sewer raid. Moving on, we got Obi Killer, who says, hey WP, my question to you is regarding, do you think Path of Fire will kind of bring that same sense of threat to the character? In terms of how in Nightfall there was a sense of urgency that Abaddon was rising, or even in the core game, the threat of Zhaitan was supposed to be very real, as an Elder Dragon was meant to be one of the most powerful beings, excluding gods. But we took down Morgemoth and Zhaitan a bit easily, in my opinion. Do you think that ArenaNet can capture that same sense as we did when fighting Abaddon in the Realm of Torment? I remember in the Guild Wars 1 days, even getting to Abaddon was a bit of a challenge going through the Realm of Torment, but in Guild Wars 2 I've not ever felt that same sense of threat or challenge as the character or player. Okay, so you've touched on a billion different things here. What I will say though is Guild Wars 2's main reason why it fails to give you a true sense of threat, I think, comes down to the separation of threatening gameplay with threatening storytelling. To me, they kind of have to go together for my sensibilities as a gamer, and I suspect yours too as you ask this question. So like an example, I think the Massat in Guild Wars 1 felt extremely threatening because you had to infuse your armor, and if you didn't have your armor infused, they destroyed you with spectral agony. And it was more that than all the extra story that was going on about how they were invisible before you got to see them. I think that Abaddon was quite threatening because Nightfall had some genuinely challenging missions. I remember quitting Nightfall, and by the way, this is the reason they won't do hard stuff, because they know it causes people to quit games. I remember quitting Nightfall at the Gate of Madness mission right before the end of the story because it was that hard, and I came back only a couple of months later, and Nightfall was my favorite part of the franchise. So I think that there are a lot of players out there that unless the gameplay is really challenging them, they're not going to be threatened, and that's why I think you need to look to raids to fulfill that experience for you in Guild Wars rather than the core narrative stuff. As to the rest of this comment, obviously Path of Fire's out now, and I'd be very curious about how you actually felt in the end. My other 2 cents I'd put on this is I wonder whether this is a mistake of Guild Wars to constantly be pursuing that idea of us feeling threatened. Like, I remember reading about Heart of Thorns, why they never got to so many different stories in it, because they felt they had to keep it focused on Morgemoth so that he felt like a threat, so that there was some urgency, so that it didn't feel too meandering, and so on and so on. And that's kind of the position that they've perpetually put themselves in with this game now. When with other MMOs, and even Guild Wars 1 a lot of the time, sometimes you can present a story not because there's this constant aggression that's supposed to be looming over us, but because there's just some thrill of exploration. If you look at how many of the Guild Wars 1 campaigns and stuff started, it wasn't always because of immediate crazy levels of threat. It was more, you know, there could be some devastation like earthquakes strike the land, but there's a level of curiosity there, or even just, you know, relaxed exploration and learning about the world, like the Xingji arc in Factions before the plague starts to become a thing. And we're curious about what's happening and why people are becoming sick before there's this big threat that then drives everything. And that gave those products a little bit more time to breathe. And especially when you look outside Guild Wars, a lot of other games, a lot of other RPGs have that breathing room. And Guild Wars, especially within the expansion cycle sections, where they're trying to be these big movie pieces, often doesn't get that. It was funny because I read a comment very recently, someone was criticizing Path of Fire, and this isn't a criticism I necessarily agree with, but they were saying that Path of Fire sucked because it was too much meandering, which was crazy to me because I felt like it was not meandering enough still, even just like Heart of Thorns. But it's funny that people are in that kind of conflict. And for what it's worth, we shouldn't mistake this discussion with also the idea of juggling too many stories at once. I wouldn't say that Living World Season 3, for example, was too meandering. I think it's more that it just had too much subject material and it didn't have enough time for each individual arc that was going on. But the fact that we were going all over the world was actually not necessarily too bad. Anyway, this entire discussion feels like it's been too high level and fluffy to be that interesting, so let's move on. Next question is from Sombrego, who is responding to something I said on a Q&A a while back, which was the idea that Guild Wars would struggle doing an expansion every single year because people would be kind of being asked to pay $30 every year, and then that moves it into sort of that subscription-y kind of feel. And I suggested that this might be something to be cautious of. They said this, that saying paying $30 every year is too much is a joke. I mean, so many crap games are 50 plus, and monthly fees in most MMOs are 10 to 15 range per month. Paying for the price of 2 months to have a full expansion every year doesn't seem like crazy on the wallet, let's be real. And I think that having only expansions every year and no living world story would be a lot better. I'm not super excited about knowing where Marjorie and Casimir love boring story goes, while having new areas and spells to play with is a lot more interesting. So, I mean, for most of this, I agree with you. I would love an expansion like Path of Fire every year. Christ, are you kidding me? That would be crazy good. But when I say that this franchise has to be careful of that, it's not so much about broader gaming. And by the way, I think a lot less MMOs are subscription-based MMOs these days, and we should sort of shift our perspective on that. But it's not so much about broader gaming. I know that a lot of other games have horrendous pricing structures that people put up with just because, well, to go into that would be a whole other thing, I suppose. But it's more about Guild Wars as a franchise. And I mean this in the least offensive way possible, because I really don't think it is offensive. But Guild Wars as a franchise has always had a strong core user base of more budget-oriented gamers. It's true, a lot of us, myself included, got into this franchise, whether it was in Guild Wars 1 or 2, because that lack of a subscription fee opened the door as a more budget experience. There are a huge amount of people that get thousands and thousands of hours out of this game just with the initial box price, and those people are happy with that, and they're proud with that. And I do think the demo here is a little bit more shifted to people who'll be wary of being asked to spend even just $30 a year. But I mean, I'm willing to be wrong on this. Not that I think it matters us discussing it, because I really don't think the ArenaNet will ever go. I was very pleasantly surprised by the community when mounts were properly revealed, because I was quite worried that there would be a bit of a backlash, and there just wasn't. The number of people have said, oh, I thought they would suck, but they're actually really good, is through the roof. And maybe it would be a similar thing here. I'm very happy to be wrong there, and I'd be very happy to be wrong on this one too. And lastly, let's go with Jonathan Irwin, who says, since we're rolling into Living World Season 4 soon after Path of Fire drops, do you think that Season 4 will be longer than Season 3, considering that they probably need another 2 years for X-Pac 3? So yeah, I don't think many people have thought about this. The no content drought thing is excellent, because it means not just that we go episode 6, 2-month wait into an expansion, 2-month wait straight into the new season, but big picture, it also means that this next season has so much space to be longer. So we just had a 6-episode one, but that's after like a 9-month wait. So if we add an extra 9 months onto Season 4, because everything's already structured and organized this time, how many more episodes is that? That's potentially 3 episodes, maybe as more as 4 more. So we could be having a 10-episode Season 4. Maybe if we really push it, we could be getting like 11 episodes. That would be the longest season they've ever done. No, it's kind of hard to compare Season 1 stuff to their formats these days. But think about a map every single episode there. Think about how much more room they've got. Are they going to still do a map every episode? Or maybe is the first episode of Season 4 not going to add a full map, and it's going to focus more on the desolation and small instances like we saw in episode 6 of Season 3? They got so much more breathing room, and that is one of the things that is most exciting to me. Don't forget that this was potentially being worked on from way back when Lake Doric came out, because that's the first team, and once they'd done that, if they weren't then going to help with the finale or whatever, they could have been working on these stories and whatever it is that we've got coming up. I suppose there is another chance at something else, and that's that because the devs didn't really know how the game would feel, how the game would be reacted to, and all the finer points of Path of Fire, maybe back when Lake Doric came out, that Living World team instead picked up a different project, and we'll get like that as a buffer thing instead. Now, that could be any number of things. That could be core systems, that could be a do-over on a lot of the Season 3 stuff to sort of implement things that they never had time for before, or maybe, yeah, they just flew straight into it. There's the other half of the company too, the expansion-making half. If you think about this, guys, in theory, the expansion team, if they fly straight into expansion 3, like right now, as I talk to you, they're working on expansion 3. If they've done that, that could actually mean that expansion 3 comes out quicker. Because they actually openly said that Path of Fire only had about 18 months of development. Not the full 2 years, about 18 months of development. So that could mean that we get a year and a half waiting for X-Pac 3, or it means that the X-Pac 3 team too could have a buffer where they go to work on core systems, or they do a bit like what happened with Heart of Thorns, which is that they do a Path of Fire 2.0 patch for the first few months, and then roll in, and then it's the 18 months. Like, there's so many different things they could do, and I feel like we've gone way off the deep end now of what gamers should be thinking about when they're fans of the product, but I guess that's what comes with the kind of transparency we've been fortunate enough to have here in this community. I'll end with a slightly more cynical note, and that's that because of mounts being in the game now, maybe the Season 4 maps will need to be a lot bigger and have a lot more in them and a lot more care with how they're designed and structured, which could slow it all down. And even though they've got all this extra time, maybe Season 4 will still only be the same length, because each individual release will take longer to come out. We won't be on a 2 to 3 month cycle anymore. We'll be on a 3 to 5 month. I don't know. Christ, all these numbers. I'm really curious about your feedback on most of my answers today, guys. So I'd love to hear it down below. If the questions seem a bit weird or specific or odd, again, I do apologize, but I only really had a base of stuff from pre-Path of Fire. So how about you help me out on that? For the next Q&A, I'd love to have a lot of great questions to look at. So if you've been prompted into any thoughts, we've got anything whatsoever, spoiler related, non-spoiler related, related, leave them in the comments down below, and we'll be doing a Q&A very soon. The next one will be super Q&A, and that's already live on Patreon if you guys want to check that out. But yeah, for the next Q&A, I want a good base of post Path of Fire stuff, and that should be a lot of fun. Thanks very much for watching, guys. As always, it means the world to me. If you listen to me right now and you got to the end of the video, it's incredible. Thank you, everybody, and I will see you for more good stuff very shortly. Take it easy, guys.